cultural call out. We sure don't appreciate that.
All right, welcome back to Salty Saints. Tonight we have with us none other than Jeff Strong. And first things first, Jeff Strong says that the church needs more gardeners and fewer gatekeepers. Tonight we're going to find out what that means, and we're also going to touch down on something known as the non-nourishing church experience as one of the primary drivers of people leaving the church, and how the church experience may be to the church as a Sudanese man is to Ireland right now. So we are going to be talking all that and more, but Jeff, let us talk about, first thing, what do you mean when you say the church needs more gardeners and fewer gatekeepers?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you. I got to admit, that was the best podcast introduction I've ever been part of.
All right. Hey, we like to keep things fun on here. Yeah.
Probably dates me and predates you, but I was having flashbacks to the Hollywood movie classic, The Three Amigos.
Yeah.
And, so I applaud your wonderful creative introduction. More gardeners and fewer gatekeepers. Well, I've said this before, but maybe it's a good way to start our conversation. There's a beautiful thought in the concept of the gathering of Israel, and that thought is gather. And so I don't think that you can fully realize the vision of the gathering of Israel if you have a mindset of gatekeeping instead of gathering. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have standards and expectations and all of that, and I'm sure we'll get into that, but we need to gather. And gardeners gather and gatekeepers sift.
That's an important distinction to make, and I think we're going to touch down on that a little bit later. I like that idea of sifting, and how it kind of warps some members' perception of what their duty is in the church. But before we get there, I would love it if you could kind of walk us through. Your son Cale had an interesting experience, and from what I believe, that kind of started your whole research into what is driving people away from the church, as you've authored the book Torn, trying to figure out what are reasons why people are leaving, and that church experience being one of those that we're going to talk about. But it all started with Cale. So walk me through that.
Yeah, it started with Cale. You know, Cale's 32 now. This was 13 years ago. And so Cale was kind of your classic, really good white shirt and tie Latter-day Saint teenager. And he put his papers in. Just, by the way, it was just at the time that they allowed missionaries to go out at 18 instead of 19. And so he was ready to go, chomping at the bit to go, put his papers in, got a call to Japan. And then just a few days into the MTC experience, I got an email from him, and it wasn't on P-Day, so I knew something was up. And I opened the email, and it was not good. You know, he, in so many words, he said, "Hey, I'm not going to go through with this." And he didn't say he was going to leave the church, but I, reading between the lines a little bit, it was pretty clear to me that he was on his way out of the church. And so it was, Hayden, I got to tell you, I know you're a father, and you have, I'm sure, big hopes and dreams and aspirations for your beautiful children. And so did I, man. And so I wanted Cale. I had such an amazing experience when I served my first mission. I went to Australia, the Australia Sydney mission, when I was 19, and it just changed my life. And it ushered me into adulthood in a spectacular way, and it deepened my roots in the gospel in a spectacular way. And I just wanted the same thing. I wanted my children to have the same incredible good experiences that I had. And so this wasn't in my playbook, man. It wasn't something that I anticipated happening. And I was serving as a bishop at the same time. And Hayden, it's kind of an out-of-body experience to preside over your son's farewell one week and have, visions of him returning 2 years in the future, victorious as missionaries do. And then, a couple of weeks later, announcing to the ward that my son had come home. And so that was tough. That was tough. And most importantly, it was tough on Cale. but in my ward there were people leaving, and they didn't fit the narrative at the time, right? It wasn't, these were not, the narrative back then, and it's still the narrative in many ways is, hey, yeah, people leave the church, those people, right? People that lack the faith
Right,
in
right.
Latter-day Saints. Kel didn't fit that profile, and the people in my ward that were leaving were absolutely salt of the earth, faithful, committed Latter-day Saints. And so
Yeah.
my mind just couldn't handle it. It was like, what?
So you
Like,
didn't have any suspicions beforehand that maybe he was teetering in his faith or anything like that?
no,
It seems like
no.
there may have been some cognitive dissonance, well, moment
Yeah,
where you kind of stood back and was like, "What's going on?"
yeah, no, I want to be really open with you. In hindsight, can I look back now and see some things that if we had been less myopic, we might have picked up on? Yeah, yeah. But
Mm,
Kale, Kale would tell you today, he's 32, he's no longer participating in the church. He would tell you that he had a fabulous church experience growing up, amazing youth leaders, awesome activities, wonderful classroom experiences. He loved seminary. And so there were no indications in those areas. And so it was a surprise for sure. Now if he were here with us, and by the way, he'd be a great guest. If he were
yeah.
with us, he would say, it wasn't as sudden as you think it was. It wasn't as sudden
Yeah.
as it felt to you, Dad.
Well, there's that old saying that things happen gradually, then suddenly,
Yeah,
So
gradually and then
maybe it
all of
was
a
something
sudden.
like that.
Yeah, and so it was a time of really stepping back in a big way and saying, man, what is it that I'm not understanding, right? This
Right.
my son's decision, feels uh, like it's an outlier here, and I'm seeing these people in the ward that I'm the bishop of that it doesn't make sense. And
Yeah,
I was pretty naive, to be honest with you, back in 2012, 2013. And so that's really when my education began.
I see. So it seems like your initial knee-jerk reaction was kind of, I think you've called it like a fix-it mindset, where you're like, "Oh crap, I've got to fix this
Yeah,
somehow." Can you
yeah.
walk me through that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I think I made the mistake a lot of Latter-day Saint leaders and parents do, where I thought, well, he's young, he doesn't have the wisdom I have, he's not
Right.
battle tested in his faith. So if I can just figure out the right general conference talk to send him, he'll be
Right.
okay. You know.
If he
So
just sees the right information, yeah.
yeah,
Like if
he
he can just
just
understand it the way I do, then he would see
yeah,
it the way
that's
I
it.
see it.
That's it. That's it. I mean, you
Mm,
just nailed it, Hayden. And so I fired an email back, and I still have that email, and it was full of kindness. But I explained things to him, right? I
yeah.
kind of said,
Yeah.
let me explain things to you. And that you're having some stage fright, and missions are overwhelming at first, and you'll be fine. And let me tell you all the great things that are going to happen. And let me share three or
Yeah.
four amazing experiences from my mission. And none of that was a bad or malicious response. It just was one that was, number one, highly ineffective, but number two, is a demonstration of my lack of command of the moment, right?
Yeah.
And it took me a long time
So
to learn, but I should have been listening more and talking less.
I see. So you felt like maybe you were too overbearing at the time. In hindsight, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's funny because I don't see myself as an overbearing person, but
Yeah.
I think so. We don't have like a hyper orthodox Pharisaical kind of family culture, but we do have a culture of high expectations, right?
Mm,
And
yeah.
so one of the things that I learned from this is um, that part of a family culture, high expectations, is like oxygen in the air. So it wasn't like I had to say to my kids, I want you to serve missions. It was just understood. If you're
Mm,
in the strong family, you're gonna serve a mission, you're gonna marry in the temple, and you're gonna be a faithful Latter-day Saint. And oh, by the way, we read our scriptures every day and have family prayer, and that's just what we do, and those are the expectations. And so um, and I can be I'm a kind and diplomatic person, but I'm not a wilting lily. I have a strong personality, and so,
Sure.
uh,
Yeah. A
so
little Cholula sauce in the blood there. Yeah.
yeah, my kids would tell you that they felt the wind of expectations in our home, and Kale
Mm,
certainly.
yeah. So there was a lot of pressure to go out there to serve, and that was probably that definitely has to do with the family. That probably also has to do somewhat with the culture of the church, and
Yeah,
so there are some cultural forces there. So all of this happens, and you mentioned that you wanted to figure out why people leave the church, like why people are stepping away. So you started this. I think it's the largest study that's been done to date,
yeah,
gathering
and
data, figuring out, trying to understand why people leave the church.
yeah,
Is that right?
let's talk about that study. Let me tell you a little bit about the water that ran under the bridge in between that moment and the study, which was the study didn't happen until 2023. So it was 10 years later I did the study or
Yeah.
started the study. But my education started just by talking to people. And so I would visit with the members of my ward that were going through this and mostly asked a lot of questions, quickly figured out that I wasn't going to be able to fix things for them and that was probably the wrong goal. But I was trying to listen and learn. And then I'd spent 2.5 years working for the church doing work in this general space. I can't talk about that in any kind of
Sure.
detail, but I was talking to people of all different denominations about what brings them to belief and what takes them away from belief, including Latter-day Saints. Then I was a mission president. Man, that was maybe the most educational, formative experience of my life. 700 missionaries over 3 years,
Wow.
about 4,300 interviews, 300 meetings, 50,000 pages of weekly letters.
Holy
That's
smokes. Where
that
was
was
this?
Arkansas Bentonville. And Hayden, I
Oh,
paid attention.
nice.
I paid attention. I was listening. I was learning. I was watching. Of course, I was teaching and leading too,
Yeah.
but I was paying attention. And then the research kind of started when I got home in 2021. And part of the reason I decided to do it is that I had friends leaving. So, when you're on a mission, you disengage and you're gone for 3 years. So you're not corresponding a lot with your friends back home. But when I got home, for example, my first counselor when I was a bishop left the church, he and his wife and their children. And so, we went out and had breakfast and he caught me up and we had a great conversation. But I felt like based on all my experiences, everybody, many people have been fathers or bishops. Fewer people do work for the church. Fewer are mission presidents. I was forming a unique perspective that I thought could help people deal
Yeah.
with this in their families better than we did. And I thought, I'd really like to help. Maybe I'll write a book. And then I started to outline the book and realized nobody's going to want to listen to you pontificate unless you have some data, right? And so
Yeah.
I contacted a handful of friends that I had largely through my time at BYU and my time at the church. I became pretty good friends with a bunch of world-class researchers. So I contacted them and said, "Hey, this is what I want to do and why will you help me?" And by the way, I have a lot of research background in my professional life. I was a CPG or consumer products executive, so we did research all the time. But
Sure.
I wanted to do a world-class job, so I got these experts to help me. And that was 2023. We wrapped it up a couple of years ago, and concurrent with that, I was writing a book. So anyway, that's what got us to this moment, Hayden. I don't know if you want to talk about the study and the methodology and how people should think about that. I'll leave that up to you, but I'll go wherever you want me to go.
I heard that Deseret News had some pushback on it. I don't really care that much. To me, the data's the data. I'm like,
Yeah,
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 I actually will take the data as it is. I understand that the methodology, it can get a little hard to generate that kind of data, but I do appreciate the amount of data that you were able to
yeah. And
collect in there. So
I'll just give your listeners a respectful way to think about it.
yeah,
If you had 4 or 5 million-ish dollars, you could go out and do what's called a probability sample, right? Where you would get a true probability sample that was absolutely representative of all Latter-day Saints in the United States. And then no one would push back on that study because they would say that is absolutely the gold standard, right? But nobody, even the church, will spend $4 to $5 million on that kind of study on this issue, and we didn't want to do that either, right? And so somewhere between the gold standard of a world-class probability sample and where we've been in the LDS community, which is no study and just conjecture, anecdote, and speculation, is something in the middle, which is called a really good study that's not a probability sample, right? And so
Right.
we use what they call a mixed method technique to get reliable data. It's not representative. We shouldn't claim it's representative. It's just incredibly useful for learning. And so, as long as you're mindful of some of the limitations in the study, you're going to be okay. And we are, and we're pretty transparent about those, but it's incredibly useful to learn.
I love that. We did get a super chat. I wanna touch down on this real quick. This is from DIY Weekend. He said, "Heavenly Father is perfect, and even he lost 1/3 of his children." Kind of
Yeah.
reaching back to like parents can do all the right things,
Yes,
and their children will they still have their agency to
they
walk
do.
away and to say, "It's not for me. No,
Not
thank
for
you."
me.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of us. So 3 of my 5 children are out. Um, 61% of my birth family. So in other words, the posterity of my parents are out. And it's very natural if that happens to you to really internalize it and say, wow, how did I mess up? Like, what
Yeah.
did I do wrong? And, with time and experience and all the learning I've done, I've realized, I don't think we did mess up. We tried to raise our children the way that good Latter-day Saints do, and we did that really well. And as you said, sometimes people make other choices. And by the way,
Totally.
love all 3 of my kids. I don't worry about them. They're great people. They're living really abundant, happy, constructive, high character lives. And
Yeah.
there's certainly times that I wish I could share some of the things that are so important to me with them. And I actually can. It has to be done a certain way, but
Yeah.
they respect where we are, and we respect where they are, and we have very good relationships.
It sounds like you've landed in a healthy place there. So
Yeah.
it seems
By the way,
like there were. Oh yeah, go ahead.
probably we probably didn't land there. We probably climbed there like Mount Everest over about six
Yeah.
or 7 years. It was hard. It was hard at first.
Yeah. Well, it takes some effort. And I'm glad that you're speaking to that because I think that is a big struggle for a lot of families. I know from personal experience, I've known families, I've been a part of families. It seems like a lot of times when people leave the church, um, they come across information that it's. I think both sides think about it the same way. Like,
Yeah.
oh, if only they saw this information, it would
Yeah.
change their mind and rock their world. And so they both start. It starts almost like a trench warfare of like, well, let me throw these anti-podcasts your way, and then the other side is throwing general conference podcasts saying,
Yeah.
oh, these are spiritual feasts. Oh, look at that, And then both sides are just kind of shooting past each other the whole time, thinking if only
Yeah.
you understood it the way I do, then you would come to agree with me.
Yeah, that's such a good observation by you. So most of your listeners will probably know who Jared Halverson is. Jared's a BYU professor and just an extraordinary teacher. And I heard him give a presentation once. It was called "Never Waste a Good Faith Crisis," and he uses Brian McLaren's stages of faith model. So if you're
Yep.
familiar with that, it's simplicity. I think it's perplexity next, then complexity, then harmony. I think I need to brush up on my McLaren model. It's been a while. It's actually in my book. But when someone moves from simplicity to perplexity, it sets up this conflict, right? And what Jared
Yeah.
would say is somebody that's left simplicity looks at people that are still in simplicity and says, "Where's your brain, man?" And people that are in simplicity look at people in perplexity and say, "Where's your faith, man?" And so it's the
Right.
conflict.
Right.
It's the conflict that you're talking about, and it's just more complicated than that. And we have to do a better job of trying to understand each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So getting into the study, there were 4 different categories that you mapped out. It seems like the data kind of fell around 4 general areas.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about those areas and kind of how you landed on those?
Yeah, so when you do research, if you're doing it in the best way, you do qualitative research first, right? And all that means is you talk to people. It might be one-on-one interviews, it might be focus groups. In my case, it was all of those plus being a mission president and a bishop and all of that. So when it comes time to actually write a survey, you've got a pretty good idea of what the answers to the questions are going to be.
Yeah.
If you've done your homework, right? So the way that we asked the question is we said, well, we asked it 2 ways. We said, here's a list of 4 reasons people often cite as the reason they stepped away. Which one of those best applies to you? So we gave them 4 choices, but we gave them a 5th choice too, which is none of the above. Now, the reason you do that is if your qualitative work wasn't quite right and you missed something, you want them to be able to say, hey, it's none of these 4, it's something else, right? And then
Yeah.
you send the survey out to some test users, and then we rolled it out in stages. So the first place we placed it, we got 400 or 500 responses. And what we were looking for in that question is how many people selected none of the above? And there were almost none. Okay, so because nobody picked it, you can confidently say, okay, these 4 reasons we offered them are pretty comprehensive, and they're happy with those choices. So they could pick from that 4. The first one was lifestyle. About
Yeah.
6% said, hey, the lifestyle doesn't work for me. The second was church history. 42% said church history was the main reason they stepped away. The third was social issues, about 33%. And then the fourth was church experience, about 18%. So that's the
Yeah.
first way we asked it. The other way we asked it is we just gave them an open-ended question and said, hey, tell us why you left. And they
Hmm.
typed whatever they wanted, and we compiled the comments and then used some AI analysis to extract out the reasons. And obviously they matched pretty well. And so those are the 4, we called them waves in our study, but those were the 4 big buckets, and I'm happy to talk more about that if you'd like.
Yeah, let's get into the non-nourishing church experience because this is
Yeah.
something that you think you're suspecting may be playing a bigger part than what was represented in the data. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. So obviously numerically it's not the one that's most commonly cited, but from interviewing people and just observing people, um, and I'd be interested in your take on this, Hayden. But I know a
Yeah.
lot. I know a lot of people that have concerns about some church history issues, or maybe even like big concerns about church history issues. But if they're having a fabulous experience in the church, right? They feel a connection to divine things. They feel the Spirit. They feel nurtured nourished.
Yeah.
Um, they're inspired by trying to be a disciple of Christ, and the experience they're having in the church is helping them do that. They tend not to be as troubled by church history issues. Now, I want to be really careful because for some people, the church history issues are big enough. It doesn't matter how great their church experience is, those issues are enough that they'll step away over that. And I don't want to suggest that that's not happening. But look,
Right.
I'm pretty knowledgeable on church history issues. Some of them trouble me a bit, but because I'm pretty rooted in the gospel and my church experience has been positive, I've never felt like I wanted to step away, right? Same thing with
Yeah.
social issues. Social issues are a big bucket, 33%. But if your personal experience in the church has been positive, then you're less inclined to be feeling a great sense of conflict over social things. And so I
Right.
think wave 4 is probably punching above its weight here. And then here's what I tell you. I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and the interviewer
Yeah.
did a great job framing this. She said, "Okay, you've got 4 waves, and it's like waves crashing on the beach, and then culture is like the undertow, you know." And so
Yeah.
by the way, culture is also the lifeguards on the beach. And so if the culture is really good, then it relieves some of the tensions in those four waves, like a lifeguard pulling you out of the surf. And if the culture is not good, it makes the tensions worse, like a riptide pulling you out to sea. And
Yeah.
so I think culture is also a big part of wave four.
Yeah. So you've brought up some interesting points because I do agree. I think there are a lot of times when people, I tend to be more of a practicist. So if the people who are attending church are finding that it is an enjoyable, nourishing experience, I think for the most part, they're not going to be troubled by church history or anything like that. It reminds me of a conversation I had with my friend. So I dropped banana bread off at his house because he helped me with with my car. Excuse me. And he is a he's kind of like this short Mexican cholo guy. He's covered in tattoos. He's got gauges. He's got a green mohawk, and
Nice.
we're really good friends. And every time we drive out in public together, people think that he's kidnapped me because I'm just a tall white guy in khakis, father of five. And
Yeah.
so he told me once. So he started dating a gal who's Baptist, and I dropped off some banana bread and she immediately started springing into, oh, polygamy and oh, this and oh, you guys worship the devil and all that. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
hey, hands up. I just got banana bread. Whoa, we're all right.
Celebrate. That's all I'm here for.
Yeah. And so my buddy told me after that, he's like, hey, man, don't worry about any of that. He said, people are going to join your church, not because of what it did in the past, but for what it can do for them now. He's
Yeah.
like, that is what people do. Like people, that's their behavior is what can this church do for me? And
Yeah.
so I kind of, I thought that comment was a little bit more profound than he realized.
Yeah. I
I
agree.
think that people, if they are having a genuinely good experience at church, if they find the benefits of the gospel, if they nourish the seed, it sprouts and it gives good fruit, they're going to taste that fruit and say, "Yeah, let's keep going."
Yeah.
And so I think that's at the heart of it. The other thing that I want to touch down on is the impact of social media. I think social media is one of the main drivers of people checking out, not feeling as much of a need to check into their local church experience and to make it meaningful because they're getting enough of a social hit from their phone to say, oh, I'm good. I don't need to check in. I'm fine.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like that general conference talk about the deer that starved on hay. So they ate a bunch of
Yeah.
hay.
Yeah.
It didn't nourish them. So they
Yeah.
ended up dying. I think that's what's happening to people's spiritual lives as they go out, they're on social media, they get all their connection there, they attend church. And for the most part, most people's churches, the experience that I've heard from most people is they kind of go through the motions. It's like I check in, I go to my class, I sit down, people read at me, I read a couple paragraphs, and then maybe I fist bump with a couple guys as we're wrangling kids in the hallways as we
Yeah.
are leaving the church, and that's
Yeah.
basically the experience. I've known a handful of couples that great young couples, millennials, they're sharp, did everything right. They went on missions, they got married at the temple, high callings at the local level. They're both in like young men or young women, and I've known couples that just step back after a while. They're like, this just really isn't doing that much for us. And so
Yeah.
I see it happening. And at first, it's like they're just kind of wandering the halls. They're not engaging with a whole lot of people. And then eventually, I think there's a tipping point. And the tipping point that I think people reach is when the pain of walking away from the church becomes less than the pain of continuing to show up. So
Yeah.
if
No,
that
I'll tell you.
threshold is crossed, then they're like, I'm done. I'm out.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, for a guy that's not a professional researcher, you've got pretty good instincts. Those are all, I think all those insights are pretty much on the money.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I've been in the church my whole life, so
Yeah.
so I've seen a few things. Yeah, but I think
Yeah.
I think that's probably what's going on. I think a lot of this is being driven by social media because we're seeing a lot of members leave, and I think social media is creating this starvation, this social starvation, that is keeping people at bay from digging into the
Yeah.
local ward. But we're also seeing that programs have been stripped away. So
Hmm.
we are actually living in the age of home-centered,
Yeah.
church-supported
Yeah.
gospel learning. which is really interesting. So the home is basically the church now, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, no, those are all really good insights. I'd love to touch on a couple of those things.
Go for it. Yeah.
They're really good. One, just social media. I touch on this really briefly in the book, but there's a guy named David Brooks that years ago wrote a best-selling book called The Road to Character and spoke at a BYU devotional. And I like how David thinks. He's a great thinker. He's a great communicator. But he talks about feeding on shallow food and the idea that shallow food doesn't satisfy deep hunger. And he specifically targets social media as a form of shallow food. And so
Yeah.
he cites some really compelling data that we're going through a bit of a relational crisis in the developed world right now, including the United States, where people feel disconnected, disaffiliated, lonely, distrusting, and yet we have all these things we do to feed on shallow food like social media, but yet our sense of belonging, our sense of meaning, our sense of connection is not as strong, right? And so
Yeah.
there's something in our human algorithm here that's not quite firing right, and I think you've nailed it. The other thing I would want to point out is you talked about how people will sometimes say, "Hey, there's just nothing here for me. I think I'm gonna step away." And I know some that would say, well, if they weren't selfish, they wouldn't do that. Or if it wasn't the me generation, they wouldn't do that. And I think when people say that or think that, they're mischaracterizing the issue. People are not stepping away from a church experience because they're selfish, although that could happen. Most of the time, they're stepping away because they want something more meaningful. And part of that might be to do more service, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so I know people that don't participate in the church anymore, but they amp up quite a bit the service they do in a community. So it's not necessarily a selfish impulse to say, "Gosh, I don't feel spiritually nourished here, so I'm gonna do something else." It may just be that you have a desire for a greater sense of purpose and more meaning in your life and a deeper sense of spirituality, and so you're looking for that. And I
Right.
don't think it's selfish to want things that God put inside of us as needs, right?
For sure. Yeah. So, real quick, how have you been defining? And I don't know if you have the answer for this, so I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but
That's okay.
how are we defining the non-nourishing church experience? Do we have like a rough definition? Is that just spiritual, like people
Yeah,
aren't feeling like they're taught, or is it more social, or what is that?
look, there's a lot that goes into that, but to keep it simple, in the book, I kind of frame it up as four cultural imbalances. You're aware that I use this metaphor, by the way, which came from Kale, of
Yeah.
cultural soil. So if you look up the etymology of the word culture, it means dirt or soil for the purpose of growing things. And if you think about what soil does, on one hand, it provides stability and protection, right? It holds the roots in place so that the plant isn't washed away or blown away by water and wind. The other thing the soil does is it nourishes, right? It gives the plant access to minerals, oxygen, and water, and that's what helps the plant grow. And in healthy soil and in healthy culture, you need both, right? And so when I talk
Yeah.
about things that are unnourishing, I'm not suggesting good versus evil, right versus wrong. I'm suggesting imbalances, right? Where maybe we've tipped over a little too much in the direction of stability and protection, and we've neglected a little bit the need for nourishment. So I talk about four in the book. I'll just hit them here quickly. The first
Yeah.
one is we have standards, right? We have standards. They're important. They're part of stability and protection. But if we use standards to sift people, we prevent them from developing any sense of acceptance or belonging. And you can't be spiritually nourished in a place that you feel like
Right. So
you're
this goes
excluded
back
from.
to the gatekeeping comment where you
Yes,
said people can
yes,
use these to sift. And
yeah,
there are some comments that I've been reading across. You've done other interviews and stuff like that. I've looked at some of those comments, and there are a lot of people, a lot of active members of the church that will say, "Well, this is just a sifting." So the question
yeah.
I have is like, is this a sifting or does this represent a failure? Is this a failure of maybe local leaders or is this a sifting?
Yeah, I don't want to direct blame to any particular group, or I think
Yeah.
we collectively own the culture. Like if you're on a football team, everybody on that team contributes to the culture. Everybody on the team is responsible to help that culture be healthy. And so, yes, church leaders play a role. Rank and file members of the church also play a role. And again, I think it's not about blame, it's about cultivation, right? And
Yeah.
look, the truth is, if you know anything about farming, I have a little farm here in Utah. Um, Cultivating the soil is normal, it's healthy, it's required, right? As the soil does its job, it naturally gets more compacted, it naturally gets depleted. So, cultivation is the normal, healthy thing you do to refresh the soil, right? So, I think it's less
Right.
about blame and it's more about just acknowledging that plants need more than protection and stability, they need nourishment. And so,
Right.
I don't believe in sifting. I think it's pretty clear that I don't believe in that. Now, we know that Christ talked about separating the sheep from the goats, the wheat from the tares, the prepared from the unprepared. But I think unless I'm misreading the scriptures, God is the
That was
sifter.
his job.
We're
Yeah.
not the sifters. Sifting happens later, and we don't do it, right?
Yeah. So
So
our
I
job
think
is to gather. That's
our
our
job
job,
is to
is
gather,
gather.
right? Now, I'm not suggesting that we should throw our standards out. Again, we're talking balance. Standards are important. Communities, especially church communities, religious communities that have no standards, there's no meaning in the being part of the community, right? So we need to have
Right.
those standards, and I would never suggest we lower them, but we should use them to elevate and lift people, not to sort and sift. That's the issue. And so that's number one. We can come back to it if you want. Let me hit 2, 3, and 4 as well.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, the second one is the gospel of Jesus Christ is a gospel of transcendence, right? We become new creatures in Christ. We receive his image in our countenance. We experience this mighty change of heart, right? The whole purpose of the
Right.
plan of salvation is to transcend ourselves and become more like our heavenly parents. It is not a gospel of sanctuary. Now, we have sanctuary so that when we really need it, we can catch our breath and rest for a minute and replenish. But God built us to stand in the storm, man, like to take on challenges, to learn, to grow, to make mistakes, to stumble, to get back up. And so when we are afraid of that and we create a culture that's a sanctuary culture, in other words, the church is like a bomb shelter. The world's
Yeah.
scary, the world's terrible. Be afraid of everything. Flee into the arms of the church bomb shelter and we'll take care of you. We create spiritual dependency. We
Hmm.
create people that are not spiritually resilient, and God didn't create us to be those kind of people. So I don't know if you've ever been in a position where you felt like, man, I'm not growing. I'm not growing here. I feel so bubble wrapped, so
Right.
protected that I'm not stretching. I'm not taking any risks. I'm not learning. I'm not trying new things, and I'm not making mistakes and then learning from them. And so it's not nourishing to be put in a bomb shelter, right? It's safe, but you
Mm.
can't grow there. The third one is one that everybody's very familiar with, but it's the conflict between obedience and agency, right? So agency is a foundational theology for Latter-day Saints. War in heaven, God had a
Right.
plan. Satan was cast out for infringing on the agency of man. He was going to make sure we all got back. So agency is a divine right, and obedience is also a commandment and really critical. And so how do you balance those two, right?
Yeah.
And so obedience minus agency is called fealty, which means unconditional, unthinking, uninspired, unwavering obedience no matter what, with agency on the sideline. I had a friend say to me once, yeah, the doctrine is agency, but the culture is agency, wink, wink. And and
Yeah.
so Hayden, you know this. People that are not allowed to follow their conscience, to make decisions, to be responsible for their lives are going to feel very suffocated. And so
Mm.
in
So
the
this may
church,
speak to the crowd that is feeling a lot of pressure to do things and to live a certain
yeah,
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that right? Like that crowd, they're a segment of people that feel like I don't want to let the people around me down. That's why I'm leaving,
Yeah.
or that's why I'm staying when they don't really want to stay.
Yeah, they might stay because the power of conformity and staying in the tribe is so strong that the fear of leaving is more powerful for them than the need they have to express their spiritual independence. And now,
Right.
for me, that's a really good thing. Spiritual independence. We're not talking about being a wild, crazy, rebellious. We're talking about
Yeah.
exercising the agency that came from our Creator, and then being responsible for the choices that we make. Right. And
Right.
so that's the third one. The fourth one is just the conflict. You know, Christ said, if you're not one, you're not mine. So there's an invitation in the gospel to be unified, to be one. But sameness is not the same thing as being one. And so when there's too much pressure to conform and fit a very narrow profile of what it means to be a Latter-day Saint, like, Hayden, dude, I got to tell you, but you got a beard, man.
Yeah. Look at that. Yeah.
It looks
In
good.
a
It looks
bishopric
good.
too.
Yeah, it looks good. There are places I know where you'd be shaving that if you were in the bishopric.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Like growing up in northern Utah, I know. Like but the
Yeah.
thing is, the thing where I landed on this, all right, this is a kind of a life hack here. I didn't
All
ask
right.
my leaders
Sure.
if it was okay. I just did it. And
Now,
so,
now,
but the other thing is like, they always say, your wife is your top priority. They sit you down, they give you the priorities list. They're like, she's number one. My
she
wife
likes
tells me
beard.
to keep the beard. She's like, you
Yeah.
keep that beard. I'm like, all right, okay,
Okay.
she's
Now
number one. So there we
I'll
go.
know you're really a rebel if you wear a colored shirt to sacrament meeting.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that bold, but yeah,
All right.
no,
All right.
that's the
That might.
traditional. It's like the three B's is like the beard, blue collar, the blue shirt, and then sitting on the back row. That's how the
Yeah.
three
There you
B's of
go.
avoiding high callings in the church.
Yeah. So anyway, those are the four tensions in the soil. And so I hope that helps, the listeners
Yeah,
understand this isn't right or wrong, good or bad. It's like, yes, we need standards, we need sanctuary, we need obedience, we need unity. Those are stability and protection. But we also need acceptance. We also need transcendence. We also need agency. And we also need people to be who they really are, right? And not
right,
have to pretend
right,
to be something they're not in order to fit in. And so when those things are missing, the soil is unnourishing and people feel inhibited, starved, suffocated,
right.
unnourished. And it's hard to stay in that state for a really long time before you don't just say, I need to go someplace where those needs can be met.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Now, I think in the data it mentioned that more than half of respondents did not feel a sense of belonging to their
Yeah.
local ward.
Yeah. What do
So
you think about that?
to me, it sounds right on the money,
Yeah.
especially after COVID. So
Yeah.
to me, and I've been in highly transient wards basically my entire adult life because I've been spending most of my life living in a boomer's paradise. So like it's been really hard financially, especially with the amount of kids that I've been having. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to save up to make sure that you're getting into these homes and stuff like that. So I've been living in transient wards basically my entire adult life. And in transient wards, people tend not to make as much of an effort to include you.
Yeah.
Now, I am in a home out in Texas, but uh, for most of my adult life, I get it. I think the reason why is I like the soil analogy. I'll see you that analogy, and I will raise you a millennial analogy. I think it's more like a phone that has not been updated in
Okay. I
years,
like
and
it. I
so
like
it is
it.
clunky. It's
Yeah.
slow. It's not moving. It's not responsive. It
Does
it,
it
it
go in a
needs to be
holster on your
updated.
belt? Does it fit in a
That's
holster?
right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that is what is going on. I think a lot
Yeah.
of the traditions have been passed down.
Mhm.
The way that churches have been running on traditions. They've been passed down year after year after year, and they served previous generations who had extra programs, like the scouting program. We had Duty to God. The young women had extra programs. Those are all gone now. Wards are barely doing father and sons campouts these days. And
Mhm.
so I'm
Mhm.
looking at this. I talk a lot about the elders quorum. I look at what's going on with men. I think most wards have been stepping off the gas. When we
Yeah.
made the change to home-centered, church-supported gospel learning, I think a lot of local wards began to step off the gas. We have fewer callings now because those extra programs are gone. So it puts the responsibility squarely on local wards to
Yeah.
dig in and to make intentional effort. And I think a lot of people are waiting for someone to tell them what to do. That's my hunch,
Yeah,
is
look,
what I've seen.
again, well, I think your insights are really strong. I accept those as pretty valid. Mine would be similar. And so it's a challenge, right? And so how do you help create a church experience for people where they feel a genuine sense of connection and belonging, and then from that they feel that their experience is meaningful and they look forward to it. I've been in wards where that's done extremely well. I've been in other wards where it's not done so well, and it's not an easy thing, but I think if people make the effort and have the right kind of focus, it can happen. By the way, the reason people don't feel a sense of belonging, it varies greatly, right? So
Yeah,
let me just give you a few examples. Some of these are really obvious, but in general, if you're divorced, you're going to feel a lower sense of belonging in the church because this is a church that's mostly for families, and the most common profile are married couples. If you're
right.
single, if you're young and unmarried, like once you hit 26, 27, 28, 30, 32, and you're still not married, you're going to start feeling a bit of a disconnect, right? If you're a man who didn't serve a full-time mission, you're probably going to feel a little distant from the community where that's an expectation and a norm. If you,
Or
if
if you
you
got a divorce, like a
Yeah,
divorced man,
for
there's
sure.
there's a
Yeah,
terrible stigma around that. Yeah.
big, really big. And then things that are even tougher, if you are yourself an LGBTQ plus person, or you are a parent who has a child that's going to create some challenges for you feeling like you're connected to and part of the community. And so those are all different ways that most of us are familiar with, but sometimes people feel a lack of belonging because they believe in a different way, right? And so there
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I talk about it a little bit in the book, but there are 5 different faith identity mindset segments, okay? And so
Okay.
one of those that's really common is people that their foundational beliefs rest on, we're the only true church. The restoration happened. I love prophets. I love temples. We have God's authority via priesthood keys. And what draws me to the church is knowing that I'm in the right church and knowing that I'm doing it the right way. Okay. Now that's a very, very common mindset in our church. But there are many members that don't think that at all. They say, I don't really care about that. What I want to do is I want to follow Christ, and I want to be a good person, and I want to do good. And so if it's good, I want to do it. I want to be part of it. Another group would say, I value the institution. I want to be part of that, but what I'm really all about is individual people. I want to love and lift individuals, and I want to see people grow. And I'm less concerned about, authority and structure and direction that I get from the church. I'm all about ministering to individuals. And then some people might say, all that's great, but I just kind of want to do my own thing. I'm
Yeah, yeah.
I feel a sense of independence. I'm going to take home-centered, church-supported to a farther extreme, and I really want to nurture my faith in my own way, right? And so
Yeah.
all of these mindsets exist in most Latter-day Saint congregations all the time, right? So if you're in a ward that's full, I call that first segment protectors, right? It's all about direction, authority, structure, boundaries, priesthood keys, leaders. If you're in a ward that has a bishop that's really dialed in on that and many members that see it that way, but you're one of these cultivators, or you're one of these seekers that just wants to be and do good,
Yeah.
you're not gonna feel at home, right?
I
The
see.
messages
Yeah.
coming across the pulpit are it's going, oh man, I don't know, they weren't really talking to me. That's not That's not what resonates with me. And so
Mm,
sometimes it's because people believe in a different way. It's not always, outward things, physical things. It can just simply be I've come to belief, and my foundation for my belief is different than the people that I see in my ward. So I
right.
feel a little isolated and a little lonely at times. That is so common. I've interviewed dozens and dozens of people that talk about that being their church experience.
Hmm. So it's interesting because that's going to put people at tension with the segment that believes that Christ has called us to this direction, to leave our old selves behind, become new creatures, and all kind of progress forward together. If there are people out there that are saying like, no, I want the church to bend around me and my personality and my preferences, then there's going to be a little bit of tension there that I can see. How do we navigate that in the
Yeah,
church?
and I think it's less about people wanting to bend the church to their style of believing. I think it's more that people want their style of believing to be accommodated in the church, allowed, right?
Ooh, yeah. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so the predominant culture in the church is in my model segment 3, protector culture, okay?
Yeah.
So we're the true church. We have God's priesthood authority via keys. We follow prophets, we worship in temples, and the idea here is follow the covenant path and be obedient, okay?
Mm,
Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great, and that is the prevailing culture. But you might be a carpenter of Bethlehem Latter-day Saint, where you say, "Hey, that's all good, but you know what I really want to do is I want to love and serve other people. I want to
right.
minister to individuals. You know what? What really lights me up is not going to the temple; it's going to serve at the homeless shelter, right?
Mm,
And
yeah.
if all you're thinking about is helping people at the homeless shelter or serving at Habitat for Humanity on weekends, and everybody in your ward is talking about the temple, you're going
Yeah.
to feel isolated. So
Oh,
that
totally.
person
Yeah.
wouldn't say, well, I want to bend the church to my way of thinking, so everybody has to go to the homeless shelter with me. They would just say, is it okay for me to be a full-fledged Latter-day Saint if I'm a carpenter of Bethlehem Latter-day Saint instead of, this other version? Now, see, in my
Right.
mind,
Right.
Hayden, it's like it's absolutely okay to do that, right? The whole
Yeah.
purpose is first and second great commandment: love God, love your fellow man, try to be like Christ and follow Him. And if that looks different, Hayden, for you than it does for me, it's okay as long as we're trying to we're headed in the same direction. You're probably going to
Right.
get there a little differently than I am, and that's perfectly fine.
I like that. Yeah. Because there will be that segment. So there are some members out there that are trying to enact policies that kind of go against the core doctrines of the church.
For
Right.
sure. Yeah, for
And
sure that
so
happens.
so not necessarily tolerating or not bending the church to meet them as much as just saying like, hey, for the people that are directionally aligned with us, it's about meeting them where they're at and saying, all right, well, let's try and accommodate here where we can. Obviously not changing any of the doctrine, changing policies or anything like that, but from a local ministering at the local ministering level, it's saying, all right, well, homeless shelters are important to you. Let's create some more activities where we're visiting homeless shelters,
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and look, I'll tell you, there's another one of the 5 segments I didn't talk, which is members that are more cultural. Now I got to be careful because people misunderstand us, but they're social or cultural
Yeah.
members. Now that doesn't mean they're not religious. It just means that part of the religious experience for them is the sense of connection they get from social interaction with other members in the church community and the social connection that happens with things that we do like ordinances. You're a father. When
Yeah.
I'm sure when you baptized your kids, did your family come? Did your friends come? Was it a big family thing when you baptized your 8-year-old child?
Yeah. Yeah. family flew out, from
Yeah.
other countries. It was a big deal. Yeah.
It's much bigger than just a social experience. It's a social, spiritual, religious rite of passage. And
Yeah.
so if you're a member that's really incredibly inspired and lifted by those things, relationships, sharing milestones, and that's not a part of the culture where you happen to be attending church, you're probably going to go a little bit hungry. You're going to be
Right.
wanting more of that, right? You mentioned things like father and sons outings. That's a great example, right? If
Yeah.
if you just love like if you love hanging out with the guys, taking your boys, it's the Friday night camp and the big breakfast on Saturday, and you feel the bonding of brotherhood, and that's not and you're in a ward where guys are just saying, yeah, no, we don't want to do that. We
Yeah.
don't want to do that. Then
Which has
you're
been
you're
in most of the wards I've been in.
yeah,
It's
you're
like they're
kind
like,
of
"Yeah, we did that back in the day." It's kind of like that Law of Moses segment that you were talking about. Like there's
yeah,
this like Children of Israel, Law of Moses segment of members out there that are like, "I did it. I just have to kind of go to church. Everything is completely dialed in. I've
yeah,
got 2 homes across the country. All I have to
yes.
do is check in, check out. I'm done."
So,
Yeah.
so don't ask me to go to fathers and sons, and you better definitely not ask me to move anybody.
Right, right. I did my time and I'm done. Yeah.
And I get those things. Here we are, we're talking, and I'm already missing fathers and sons outings. See, my sons are all grown men now. I love
Yeah.
those. I mean, I love those. I've done I think 3 Pioneer treks. I did 2 50 milers in the
Yeah.
Uinta Mountains
Yeah.
in Utah. By the way, they lied. They weren't 50 milers. One was like 67, one was like 72, and I'm like, come on, can't you count?
Yeah. That's right.
But
Yeah.
but
No.
I got to do those with men that I loved and my own sons and young men in the ward that I was serving, and I have great memories. And by the way, when I see those young men, across the street or across the store at the hardware store, I can't wait to run across the store and give them a big hug because I haven't seen them for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and you have
Yeah.
that sense of connection. So that's part of what we're talking about here.
I like that. Yeah. So I think when it comes to the nourishing church experience, there are people that kind of fall on two camps from what I've seen. Because I've been speaking about elders quorum and how it feels more like a rec center steam room than an actual fraternity for upwards
Yeah,
of a year at this point, where people just they go in, they kind of clock out, they check out mentally, they're on their phone, they read a couple paragraphs, they walk out, they're done. I look at
yeah.
that, I'm like, that's not nourishing, that's not helping anyone. Suicide rates can attest, like it's not reaching men
Yeah.
right now. And so
No, it's not.
so I'm looking at this and I think that that people from as soon as I've been talking about this, the groups that have formed, there's a group out there that's like, it's not the church's job to do that. You can,
Yeah.
if you need social connection, you need men's groups, you need stuff like that, you need friends, go out and get it. Make like a tree and beat it, to quote Back to the Future. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there's
that's
that
right.
camp, and then there's the other camp that says, you should be here. Like, hey, leaders, maybe we can do things a little bit differently. If our job and our calling is to gather Israel and gather as many people as possible, then it would stand to reason that the more that we are intentionally trying to enrich the soil and make it a more transformative, more relational, more supportive environment, the more people we're going to reach, and then we can allow the Savior to sort them out when
Yeah,
that's all said and done.
yeah. I love where you're kind of taking this.
Yeah,
What has to happen for that to occur is, and I think this is especially true for men, is the culture during the 2 hour block, especially during priesthood meeting, it has to promote some vulnerability and some honesty, right?
right.
So if it doesn't, then what you're going to do is you're just going to do the clock in, clock out, go through the motion thing because um, everybody's kind of hiding their real self. Nobody wants to put their real problems on the table because that would be way too personal, right? For when you're with a bunch of men that you don't really have deep relationships with. And so you go through the motions and then you punch out at the end of the hour. I have been in situations where people have gotten unbelievably vulnerable at church. And Hayden, it's like magic. You know,
Yeah.
I was teaching gospel doctrine in my ward a couple years ago. It might have been 3 years ago when we were doing the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
I love teaching gospel doctrine, one of my favorite callings ever. And we were talking about the book of Ether. Now, you know, that's when the Jaredites are sailing across the deep ocean. And so when I teach, I always, you know, none of us are going to get in a barge and sail across the ocean anytime soon. So if we're not likening that scripture unto ourselves somehow and trying to learn metaphorically from it, there's not a lot of value for us. And so I said, look, I want you to think about their journey across this ocean under daunting odds. And I want you to think about a time in your life where metaphorically you had the same kind of experience, where you had to go through a dark, deep, difficult time, and what you learned from that and how you felt God's hand in your life from that. And there was a
Yeah.
woman in our ward that raised her hand and just said, I have a really personal experience I'd like to share. And she talked about what it was like to go through the experience of her husband dying of brain cancer. And he was in his
Wow.
40s. He was in his 40s when it happened. And I'm telling you, you know, I won't take the time to share everything she shared, but she related how unbelievably difficult and painful that was. And then she said, and by the way, this very passage of scripture, the book of Ether, was something that gave me a lot of strength. And she referred to how God gave them light in two ways. Remember, there was one way where they had those cork-like stoppers they would pull out of the barges, and
Right.
oxygen and light would come in. But she pointed out that he gave them light inside the barges, even when the stoppers were not uncorked. And she said, I felt God give me that kind of light in my darkness. And
Mm.
it was incredible. And she was comfortable and brave enough that she was willing to take us through this really, really terrible experience she had, but how she felt Heavenly Father reached out of the pages of the Book of Mormon and took her by the hand and pulled her through a really difficult time and gave her hope.
Yeah.
And she, by the way, she's doing great now, and she can look back on that as a difficult but powerful time. That's kind of what I'm talking about, right? And so how many times are you in the 2-hour block where somebody opens up and tells you about, you know, one of their most difficult, darkest, tragic, personal things, and
Right.
that invites you into the conversation, right? And then all of a sudden you're making connections with people that are meaningful and real.
Totally. Yeah. I did an episode about this a while back where, in order to encourage vulnerability and honesty in a classroom setting, there has to be a sense of psychological safety
Yeah.
where people feel that, hey, if I share something, it's going to be received, it's going to be respected, people aren't going to change their perception of me. And so I think a lot of times, if there are elders quorums that are out there, they're just reading paragraphs, and you have maybe some gray-haired brethren in the back that are just like, back in my day, we used to build the chapels with our own hands,
Yeah,
and we
right.
didn't have emotions. That's a newfangled
That's right.
invention. And so they do, a lot of them have made comments on my videos. They're uncomfortable with emotions. They're uncomfortable. They're like, I go to church to read paragraphs. That's my job. But
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I look at, I've been in scripture before, and I see that there, when it comes to church, speaking one with another about the welfare of your soul is a theme that is repeated throughout the Book of Mormon, throughout the Bible,
Yes.
throughout the Doctrine and Covenants. And so I look at that and I think that has to be a key ingredient to a nourishing church experience.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the key ingredients that is missing from the modern church experience. Is I feel there's a lack of potentially psychological safety where people don't feel comfortable to let their guards down. But I feel like there is also a lack of format where it's just
Yeah.
something that hasn't really been updated. We've been operating on this older system where we had other ways of nourishing that connection, receiving that nourishment, speaking about the welfare of our soul. like there was scouting programs, you're going on these hikes, you're going on campouts. I'm sure you probably spoke with a lot of men shoulder to shoulder as you're trudging through the Uintas. You're swatting mosquitoes, you're setting up camp and
Yeah.
stuff like that. You're going to express your life, you're going to talk about that, you're going to probably share some concerns and struggles. If that's gone, then all of the avenues that the brethren had to talk about their struggles has been taken away from them, except for the elders quorum lesson format. And so if that's all they have, and that format doesn't encourage psychological safety, well, it's going to lead to what a lot of wards experience right now, where men just check out, they show up, they leave, and then after a while, they start asking the question, why are we going? Like my spiritual foundation might be crumbling. Maybe they're not doing the stuff at home. Like they're not praying, they're not reading their scriptures. They're starting to fade a little bit. That's the part where the leaders, instead of focusing on the one, could focus more on the 99 and say, all right, how can we help this brother? Because those are the people that you could actually reach and make a difference with right now. Whereas a lot of times I think, because you mentioned like people struggle with this question for a decade, sometimes even more, before they actually leave the church. I think at the time they leave the church, it's going to take a lot of convincing, a lot of effort, a lot of time to get them back to church.
Yeah, because it's not a decision they've made lightly or quickly.
Right.
I love the direction you're going with this, and I think in addition to vulnerability and honesty, there has to be a mindset. We use this term a lot, minister to the need or minister to the one,
Yeah.
but we sometimes give it lip service and don't actually do it. And so let me give you an example, and I don't mean to be
Sure.
irreverent here at all, but
It's
but
okay. The channel's called Salty Saints, so
Salty
we're good.
Saints.
Yeah.
I feel empowered, man. I feel empowered.
Yeah.
So if what happens during priesthood quorum is we just truck out the assigned general conference talk, and then somebody sort of regurgitates that, and there's polite discussion about it, that's not ministering to the need.
Right.
And ministering to the need is you start with the men that are sitting in front of you, and you can't minister to the need if you don't know them. If you don't know them, if you don't know their lives, if you don't know what they worry about, if you don't know their problems, if you don't know where they are vulnerable, where they need help, all you can do is run the playbook, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
I don't know. I mean, being a mission president, it was easy because I was so connected to the missionaries. I exchanged letters with them every week. I interviewed them every 6 weeks. I was on the phone with them all the time. I went out and worked with them whenever I could. And so Sarah's my wife, we always felt like, yeah, we're really dialed in on what we can do as the mission leaders to help these missionaries feel good about their missions and have a good experience and have success. So I think as priesthood leaders, we've got to figure out how to get to know the men in our quorums so that we can minister to their needs.
Right.
It has, I'm not saying that it should be bottom up instead of the top down conference talk, but boy, that conference talk, you better frame it, modify it, use it in a way that actually addresses the issues that the men sitting in front of you have. Because if you don't,
Yeah.
they're just going to check out. And then they're
Well,
going to be looking at their watches the last 5 minutes, counting the seconds until they can get up and get in their truck and they're gone.
and beeline out of there. Yeah. It reminds me, like being a missionary and probably being a mission president, you'll resonate with this. There's a chapter in Preach My Gospel that says, teach people, not lessons.
Totally.
And so I
chapter.
think, yeah. So that's I think what is happening. I think a lot of elders quorums have defaulted into teaching lessons. It's kind of like Sunday school. It's like Sunday school for boys, And
Yes.
so they've defaulted into that class format where they're teaching lessons and not people. The way you teach people, as you very well know, is you have to get to know them. It's just like what Elder Holland said. There was the quote that he gave to missionaries saying, like, I don't care that you're going through a divorce. I don't care that you just lost your child. I don't care that you just lost your job. You're going to sit down and I'm going to give you lesson 1, then lesson 2, then lesson 3, and so on and so forth.
That's a great talk.
Yeah.
It's funny. I had some, because I worked for the church for a while. When I went out as a mission president, I had friends back in Salt Lake, right? Some of them worked in the missionary department. And one of the researchers there had done a lot of work on how to improve missionary teaching effectiveness. And he
Yeah.
came up with an idea. The church didn't adopt it, but I loved it. So I taught it to our missionaries. He called it the first listen instead of the first lesson. So
Ooh.
what he figured out is if you train missionaries to have a first listen instead of a first lesson, the first time you're with that person, you don't teach them anything. Okay? You just say,
Wow.
"Hey, tell me about yourself." Like, why did you invite us in, or what do you hope to get out of the interaction we're having? You know, if you wouldn't mind, I don't mean to pry, but tell us about yourself. What do you worry about? Where you want to go with your
What are your
life?
stressors? What are your
What are
concerns
your
right now? Yeah.
stressors, and what are you hoping religion or our church could maybe help you with? And you just listen. And then guess what? When you go back the second time, you're ready. You're ready to minister to the need instead of
Right.
run a playbook, right? And so I like that principle a lot. We shared that with our missionaries and suggested they do that whenever they could.
I like that. There's a comment that I want to read real quick. This is from Emily Ensign. She says, the topic is hard for me as a convert because I didn't make the sacrifice to join the church over culture or activities or class vulnerability or history. I joined because of testimony of truth. I wonder
Yeah.
if you could speak to that for a little bit.
Well, I think, was it Emily?
Yeah.
Emily, God bless you. I think any reason somebody wants to join the church is a good one. And
Yeah.
I think the reason that you joined is probably the most common reason, is that there are people who are looking for truth. They are looking for the true church. And to me that's just a great thing. And so uh good for you. And I hope that your experience in the church has met all of the expectations that you have when you made a decision to be baptized. Now, what I'll tell you is some people don't join the church for that reason, right? They join the
Right.
church because they're looking for a community of believers that they can be part of. They want to feel part of something. They want to feel a sense of belonging. They want to be around other people who care about God and about faith because they know they need support and encouragement as they're trying to develop that part of themselves. And that's okay too, right? And they're
Right.
not too worried about whether the church is the only true church or not, because their initial motives were something else. And then there's some people that just join for social reasons initially. I mean, I can't tell you how many boys joined churches because they were chasing a cute girl, or how
Yeah.
many girls,
Flirt
how
to
many.
convert. Yeah.
I just talked to somebody today that joined the church mainly because the elders that taught her were really handsome, and
Yeah.
she
Look at
was
that.
she was
I knew
excited.
someone in my last ward who he's 70 years old, and he's been a member for about since I think he was in his 20s, and he joined the church because back then you weren't allowed to play basketball in church ball if you weren't a
Yeah,
member. So he joined to join the basketball team, and then he was a member. He's been a member ever since. And so there are different reasons why people join. I very much resonate with that because I mean I from a young age found a testimony, and that testimony to me it's kind of like eating the fruit. You realize like whoa, this
yeah,
is
that's
really
good.
great. And so
This
I,
is
I think the suggestions that we're making aren't necessarily suggestions that will directly give people testimonies, but it
yeah,
will nourish the soil where the seed has been planted so that a testimony can happen. A testimony
yeah,
can grow unencumbered by the environment. Like if there are
yeah,
things that local leaders can do to make that soil more nourishing, we should be doing that, in my
yeah.
opinion.
I think the way you frame that is exactly the right way. It's not supposed to be a replacement for conversion. It is
Right.
a way to it's a way to enhance the potential for conversion, right? And so individuals still have to do the hard work required to become converted. But if they're in healthy soil, that process happens so much more naturally and with so much more energy. And that's what we want to try to do. By the way, the scriptures teach this, right? Alma
Right.
talks about you got to nourish the tree. And if you don't nourish the
Absolutely.
tree, it won't bear fruit, right? And so by the way, you were talking about different ways, reasons people join. I've got a friend here in Midway who came to BYU as an athlete, and he just felt at home being around other young people who had good values and wanted to live their lives the way that he wanted to live his. So he
Yeah.
primarily joined just because he admired the standards and the people. And then later conversion came, right? And it wasn't a
Right.
social thing for him. It was, man, I'm really impressed. He was a non-member that came to BYU as an athlete. He was impressed with the students, and he just said, I want to be part of this community. I like these people.
Yeah.
They're my kind of people. I'm going to join this church. And then, in time, deep conversion came. He's older man now, and he's deeply converted, but that came in time.
Right. Well, and I think of my own experience growing up in the church. I wasn't always converted to the church. Like there
Yeah.
were, being raised, I went through all the ordinances at the right ages and all of that. But it wasn't until I was about a teenager that I actually had a testimony of the church. And so but I imagine that I probably would not have had a testimony that I had the structures not been the way that they were.
Yeah.
And so having great leaders, having seminary teachers, having my family even being the dynamic that it was what eventually led me to discovering the truth, And
Yeah.
once I did, I realized, oh, okay, these guys actually know what they're talking about. Like, oh man, there might be something to this whole God thing after all. Hey,
Yeah.
this is great. And so I discovered it for myself, and then I was like, okay, click, and then everything made sense. And then I started realizing, like, oh, my job as a missionary or as a leader in the church is to help other people hang in there long enough that they can get that testimony for themselves.
Yeah.
And then the savior will help them change, like if they have kooky beliefs, or maybe they're they're directionally right, but maybe they're in a different place. The savior is the one who will change their heart. That's not us. We can't change anybody's hearts, but we can
No.
provide that environment.
Yeah, I used to tell my missionaries, like, they would get frustrated sometimes if people they were teaching weren't in the missionary's mind, weren't thinking the right way, weren't believing the right way, weren't doing the right things. And then they would start to try to orchestrate the person's behavior. And so it's a
Mm.
little bit like grabbing the petals of a flower and prying them open so it'll bloom. And
Right.
I would see that behavior sometimes, and I would say, you're going to kill that flower.
Right.
And
Right.
and God created that flower. That flower knows how to bloom. You don't need to pry open their petals. What you need to do is you need to make sure that they're getting plenty of sunshine and water, and the soil is good, and then they'll bloom on their own just fine. And so your job is to love them, it's to teach the gospel to them, it's to be a friend. And if you do those things, God will help them bloom. And so I think that's a good principle to follow. We can't convert people, we can't give people wisdom. That has to happen. They have to get that for themselves. But boy, we can put them in an environment that makes that possible. Like for me, I grew up, I was pretty apathetic as a teenager. I wasn't wild or crazy. That's just kind of not how I'm wired. But I was loved. My parents loved me. I felt love for my bishop. When I was a teenager, I had a great bishop, and he never tried to fix me or even to get me to do
Yeah.
things. He took me fishing, and we'd go
Oh yeah.
fishing. We go fishing and we talk about everything under the sun, jump shots and the atonement. And so he kind of guided me through my teen years, and then I was really blessed to be sent to a mission where I had a fabulous mission president. And so
Hmm.
you talked about being in a place where you can flourish. Man, I flourished as a missionary because I was around great young men and young women. I had great mission leaders. And that's when the gospel came to life for me. That's when I experienced conversion. I came to understand what the atonement was. I saw it in my life. I saw it in the lives of the people I was teaching. And wow, what a wonderful thing to do as a 19-year-old, to be put in a group of people that are doing that type of work. and then have the experience I did, it changed my life and the trajectory of my life. And so I think that's what we're talking about. The soil that I experienced as a missionary was fabulous.
I like that. So, without giving too much away, your book ends with a reconciliation account with you and Kale.
Yeah.
Uh, what did that teach you about how we talk to the people that are spiritually starving or who have already left?
Yeah, let me speak specifically to Kale and I, and then I'll step back and maybe give some general principles. But
Sure.
I used to look back on what happened 13 years ago as a tragedy, and I know there are some active members of the church that would say, "Well, it was a tragedy. Your son left the church."
Yeah.
I respect and appreciate that perspective, but for probably 6 or 7 years, we treated it like a tragedy. We felt it was a tragedy. We experienced the fear that comes when you think of it as a tragedy. And because of all of those things, the lessons that God was trying to teach us were not available to us. And so it wasn't
Yeah.
until we stopped being afraid, we reignited our faith in our son and our faith in God and his plan, that the lessons started to come. I literally felt the scales fall from my eyes, and I
Yeah.
could see, and that seeing came from faith, not fear. And so Kale even told me later that he felt the change in me, and the
Yeah.
positive effect that it had on him, just because his dad started to believe in him again. And so
Wow.
that was a powerful lesson for me, and it made me feel bad for a minute, because I thought, oh my gosh, I never wanted to stop believing in you, but I guess I did until I started again. And
Right.
so, I love him so much. I love all five of my kids. Three of them are out. I don't really think of them as different from each other. I'm just really grateful to be their father, and they're great people. And I have faith in God and His plan. I don't know how it all works out. I don't know that my kids will ever come back to the church, but I quit worrying about it.
Yeah.
Not because I don't care, but because I put my trust in God. So
Yeah.
if I was giving anybody advice, the first thing I would say is, yeah, you have to remember our foundational doctrine in the church is the war in heaven and the gift of agency that God gave us, and that Christ bought for us again with the atonement. And you have to respect that people get to make their own choices, and hope. You can hope that they'll make choices that are like the choices you've made, but you've got to respect that those choices could be different, and then don't catastrophize them if they make choices that aren't the choices that you would make. Prioritize the relationship first. If the
Mm.
relationship goes and trust goes, then your capacity to share life with them and have any positive influence on them whatsoever also goes out the window. And
Right.
so you got to focus on the relationship. You got to focus on making sure that you always maintain that trust. And 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 that's the most important thing I think you can do. And then that way you've always got a seat at the table, right? And
I see.
then,
Yeah.
by the way, I love I think it was Saint Francis Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. And
Right.
so if we want to preach the gospel to people, by far the best way to do it is just example. And
Totally.
if they don't see the fruits and the light of the gospel in us, they will never be interested in what we have to say. And so
Right.
we just need to be disciples of Christ and do our thing and live the gospel, and with humility, hope and pray that we reflect some portion of his light from us to other people, so that they can see him in us. And if we
Yeah.
do that, we got a really good chance to have a positive influence on others, whether they join the church or stay in the church or not.
I like that. So are you telling me I can't send my passive aggressive general conference talks at them in the family chat
Yeah.
channels? You know, maybe
Well, you
that's not going
can.
to work.
You can, but it won't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably won't do too much out there.
Yeah, it won't work. And so, yep, I wouldn't probably recommend that. And you got young kids. You're in this magical time where you've got young
Yeah.
kids at home. And one thing I'd tell you that I learned that I'd tell anybody I care about that's got young children is just remember they don't belong to you. You
Yeah.
know, they aren't yours. You're a steward, you're a caretaker, but they belong to God, and so you can't, nor should you try to control them. What you do is you love them, you teach them, while they're young, you're providing for them.
Yeah.
You'd be a great example to them, but they don't belong to you. They're not yours. And I had to learn the lesson. I thought Kale belonged to me,
Yeah. Well, I
until you.
think I've seen that. I've seen that quite a bit on both sides. So my grandparents had a saying. They would they would say this all the time. They're like, I'm to my parents, and then my parents would say this to us when we were kids. It was like they would approach us. They're like, I'm not your friend. I'm your parent.
Yeah,
And it's kind of that was kind of the rallying cry of that generation. And I think it's the opposite. I think parents should be
yeah,
friends with their children. And so there's an interesting test that Jordan Peterson has with he says what you should do if you're an adult is you got to ask the question.
yeah, that's pretty good.
You got to turn around and ask, what do you think of the advice that your parents' friends would give you? Like, how would you take that advice? And if you would
Yeah,
take their advice, if they gave you a criticism of you, and you're like, "Oh, that's very hurtful," uh, more times than not, he's arguing that your parents' friends' advice, you would probably treat it with a degree of, uh, I guess, apathy. You'd say like, "Okay, great, that's your advice. I don't really care about you that much." He says that's how you should view your parents' advice.
yeah,
Like if you view your parents' advice the same way you view your parents' friends' advice, that means that you have matured, you are an adult, and that
yeah,
you are now equals with them. You are the same. You are on the
yeah.
same playing field. And so that is the test of whether or not you
Good.
need to do a little bit more maturing. But I have seen it, and it is devastating for that generation,
Yeah,
older generations, when they do mistake that. I've known a handful of women that were just like they they flocked to Deseret Book. They filled their house with like no empty seats at the table. Everyone's going to heaven and stuff like that. And then when their children begin to step away from the church, they just begin to lose their
it,
minds, and they just
yeah.
start
No, it's
scrambling.
it's it's catastrophic at that point. And I want to honor and respect those challenging emotions that happen when people have children step away. I mean, I went through it. I know how scary and dark it feels. But what I learned is that the antidote for that is faith, right?
Yeah,
I've said this before publicly, but I I I trust in my deep belief that God loves his children more than I trust in my understanding of what I think his eternal doctrines are.
right. I
And
like that.
yeah, and look, God's love for his children is very, very real for me. And my understanding of our doctrines is real too, but not at the same level.
Yeah. Well, there it is. So I did a little poll while this has been going, this conversation, and I asked the chat. I said, "How would you describe your current church experience?" Out of
Hey, this is
27 votes, we saw 33% said genuinely nourishing, 33% said somewhat nourishing, 19% said honestly struggling, and 15% said mostly going through the motions.
wow, that's
So
great. I love that you
pretty
did that. Yeah.
pretty evenly spread. And so
Yeah.
I'm looking at that, and I think I look at this. I look at everything that's been happening. We're seeing people leaving the church, and I think retention is one of the things that Gordon B. Hinckley focused on most as president of the church,
Yeah.
and it's been basically the core of the channel of my channel for a really long time. So I think there are some areas that elders quorums as well as relief societies and Sunday schools. I think we could probably do a little bit better job of making sure that we're cultivating that soil, that we're reaching people's hearts, that we're meeting them where they're at, that we're teaching
Yeah.
people and not lessons. And so
Yes.
I for that reason, that's why I've labeled this as a cultural call out at the very beginning. I think we could probably do better. And if we do better, I'm not a gambling man, but I would wager that we would see those other waves probably shrink in their percentages alongside that. It would correlate with a more nourishing church experience. If people felt more nourished, I think those waves would probably shrink. I don't think church history would be as big as 43%.
Yeah, and I'm not a bet man either, but I would bet a lot on your theory. And
Yeah.
having interviewed or read the disaffiliation stories of hundreds of members, I can tell you that feeling a sense of deep connection to the LDS community and to the people they love in the LDS community can help with a lot of concerns, right? And I always say this because I don't want to diminish. There are people who literally leave just because they encounter a church history issue and they say, hey, I love my fellow Latter-day Saints, but this is too much for me. I'm out. So there are people that do it purely on that basis. But
Right.
boy, I think there are a lot of people that would say, you know what, this is a community that I care about. I want to invest in. I receive benefits back from. I respect and love the people that are in this community. It lifts me up spiritually. It's helping me be a better disciple of Christ. And so I'm not gonna let some of these other issues, as legitimate as they might be, derail my experience in the church. And so, yeah, I'm convinced that people would come back. I asked people who have left, would you ever come back?
Yeah.
And 55% said no, and
Mhm.
45% said yes. So think, roughly 50-50. And then I said, what would cause you to come back? And I just had them type in open-ended responses. So I didn't give them a menu. They just typed whatever they wanted. And then I
Yeah.
used AI to identify the themes. And out of the top 8 themes, the first 7 were all cultural.
Really? So
Yes.
what kind of things are we talking about?
Yeah,
Unless
I
that
don't
gets
want to.
into spoiler territory. I don't
No,
want to
no, it's
spoil
not.
too much.
No, it's not spoiler. But I'm not gonna mess this up. So I'm gonna go right to the book, and I'm gonna.
To the source documents. Look at that. That's great.
Yeah. Okay. You ready for this? So I'm just
Yeah.
gonna hold this up. Sorry, I'll read it, but there's the data, so you can see the 50-50 split.
Wow. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Now 46% said a less rigid and legalistic culture with more love and compassion. That's culture.
Yeah.
That's culture. The second most common, 43%, a more principled and less prescriptive approach to core beliefs. More principled,
Mm.
less prescriptive culture. The third was better treatment of and a greater voice for women. That's culture. Now you'd say, well, no, that's priesthood office. No, priesthood ordination for women is number 8. I'll get to that.
Yeah.
The fourth was 31% said leadership honesty, humility, and accountability for mistakes. That's culture.
Yeah.
And then 26% said more accepting of LGBTQ plus people. That's
Mm.
culture. Now there are doctrinal components there, but they didn't say change the doctrine. They said be more accepting. 16% said open and honest discussion of church history. That's culture. Being open and honest is culture. And then
Yeah.
finally, the first doctrinal one shows up at number 8. 14% said ordain women to the priesthood.
Interesting. So I not to get too political. It seemed like a lot of those answers kind of skewed to a certain political party, uh, where a little bit more progressive end of the church, where they're saying we need to advocate for more change. Like if the church begins to change its structure, if we get more women on the stand or things like that. Uh, so I don't know how much church, at least at the local level, I don't know if there's that much that leaders can actually do to accommodate that kind of change. But the first few where it's like, hey, let's be more nourishing, let's provide more social connections, let's provide a more nourishing experience. I think we can absolutely get behind that.
Yeah, I think we can too. And can I just very gently, maybe I'm not
Yeah,
meaning,
go for it.
very gently push back. See, I think let's go down this list. 46%, less rigid legalistic culture with more love and compassion. I don't think
Yeah.
you're arguing that conservatives don't have love and compassion, are you?
No.
Okay, okay.
Most of mine were talking about like more kind of
Towards the
like
bottom.
treatment of women.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
in my
And
experience, I'm like,
LGBT,
I don't really see treatment of women as if anything, I would argue that men have been kind of pushed down to the bottom for a while.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I do see that in the anti and ex-Mormon spaces, a lot of them will voice that as soon as a boy turns 12, then he has more power and authority over women.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, it seems to be skewing more towards that end of the spectrum, which I don't know that there's too much that the church can do to address that at the local level.
Yeah, I thank you for that clarification. I better understand
Yeah.
now. I think by the way, having spent my life in corporate America, I would tell you that, and this is something that many others have advocated for, including Jordan Peterson, is
Yeah.
that there are lots of places where men suffer some disadvantages now.
Right.
And so I think the women I've talked to would say, I feel very empowered at work. I feel very empowered in my home. I've got a great husband and we're co-equal in leading our family. The place I feel less empowered is at church. And I don't want to have priesthood office. I just want the church to give women a voice because women have wisdom and perspective that could help the church be better. That's more the take that I get from them.
Oh, I got you. Well, I mean, in my experience, I look around at most of the ward councils. If there's a Relief Society president, primary president there, they basically run the show. Like most of the guys that are running, especially if they have a lot of kids and they're younger dads, they're kind of just sitting there half days. They're
Yeah,
like, okay, what's going on? And then you have an awesome primary president. They're always super organized. They're always on the ball. They're saying, we've got this
they
coming
are.
up. I think we do X, Y, and Z. In my experience, what I've seen, that's what's happening. So maybe we should be talking more about that and just making that more public. It's like women are actually calling the shots quite a bit at the local level.
Are the young men's leaders and elders quorum president checking the sports box scores on their phones?
Yeah, more times than not, I've seen
Yeah,
the men in the church just kind of checked out because
yeah. It's
they're
like,
just mentally just kind of
and then,
processing work and family and life.
and then
And
you have a really great bishop when he leans over and says, "Hey, are the Red Sox ahead?
that's right.
Are they winning?"
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Well, I appreciate we've definitely gone over the hour, but I have enjoyed every minute of this
Yeah, me
conversation.
too.
Uh, where can people learn more about Torn and pick up a copy?
Yeah, hey, I appreciate the plug there. The simple way to buy it is go to Amazon and you can get it in paperback, ebook, or audiobook. And by the way, Kale actually reads a couple of portions on the audiobook. So if you want to hear what Kale
Oh,
sounds like,
cool.
he reads the introduction that was written by Steve Young, the foreword to the book. Kale reads that, and then it's doing really well, Hayden. It's the number one bestseller in every Latter-day Saint category on Amazon, and 85% of the ratings are 5-star. So
That's fantastic.
yeah, it's resonating with people. The conversation that people are having around the book is the one that I hoped would have. I hoped that we would
Yeah.
have. And it's just good Latter-day Saints that are saying, hey, this has helped me understand issues better. It's inspired me to be more Christ-like. It motivates me to mend some relationships that maybe aren't in the best of condition. And so that's what I hoped, right? I'm not trying to
Awesome.
steer the church at all. That's not my job. I'm just trying to help everyday Latter-day Saints do a little bit better job of this than my family did.
I love that. Yeah, that's a valuable resource for every dad in the age of home-centered church.
Yeah.
And before we head out, if you are in an elders quorum that is completely dead, they've got nothing going on. That is why we created For the Strength of Dads. So be sure to check that out. That's strengthofdads.com, strengthofdads.com. We game a couple times a week. So we've got games nights that are being led. There are groups of men. You could come, you can talk with these guys, you can get to know them, you can share some jokes. we're going to be having a therapist lead group therapy sessions a couple times a month. And so we're going to have campfire chats. We've got a goal board coming out. It's really cool. We talk faith, family, finance, fitness. So be sure to check that out. We can get some friends out there. It's going to be a great time. We're going to be doing in-person events, all of that and more at forthestrengthofdads.com. So
Hey,
we've got a link in the description.
I'm going to give you some applause.
Hey, there we go.
Okay, you know what you're doing is you're cultivating really good soil.
We're trying.
Yeah, and so I just like, I admire so much what you're doing. And so great job. I hope it's a wild success. I hope the people that are, listening to you and that are participating in this will find great value in it, because that is really important.
Well, that makes two of us then. And so until next time, my name is Hayden Holm. This is Salty Saints. Be sure to subscribe and share this with other dads out there so we can expand our reach and bring in more men and see if we can gather Israel a little bit better these days. So until next time, we will see you guys later.